Okay. Hello, hello. Thank you all for coming today for our special guest here, and it is my great honor to welcome Barb McQuade. She is, as you probably all know, best-selling author of Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. So Barb grew up in southeastern Michigan. She came to U of M for undergrad, and in fact, she was a sports writer at the Michigan Daily when she was here in undergrad. She stayed, went to the University of Michigan's law school, and then rose through the legal ranks and was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Michigan. Did I get that right? No, Eastern. She served as the U.S. Attorney for the Southeastern District of Michigan, where she oversaw many high-profile terrorism and corruption cases that you all read about in the news. She's currently professor at the U of M Law School and hosts the popular podcast Sisters in Law. But you all probably know her best as the on-air legal analyst for NBC and MSNBC. Thank you for coming. We look forward to hearing from you at this difficult time. We'll talk until 11:30. Is that right, Jane? Yeah. And at that point, we'll pause, but then Barb graciously says that she would be happy to stay afterwards to answer questions. So with that, please help me welcome Barbara McQuade. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Barb. Barb and I are friends from the tennis court. And I barely recognize her today in her civilian clothing. She's usually cleaning my clock at the tennis court. So wonderful to see you here, Barb, today. And thank you so much for this kind invitation. I am really honored to be here. I worship elsewhere, and I was saying earlier, the only time I've been in this room has been for funerals. So it's really nice to be here for a more joyous occasion. And so thank you for welcoming me. I hope you'll forgive my voice. I'm a little bit raspy today because I was at the Michigan State game last night. Worth it, but as a result, I'm a little bit raspy. I had to stay to the end because it was so close. Turns out, Michigan State was not the cakewalk that we expected it to be. That turns out that was disinformation. But I'm delighted to be here today. I guess I should stay up here so people can see me. Yeah, all right, I'd rather walk around, but I will stay here for you. I wanted to talk today about this book that I've written about disinformation, and I thought in particular I would focus on disinformation relating to the election, because that is where we find ourselves in this moment, and certainly will be in the next, 8 days, 9 days until the election takes place. Or beyond, if the counting continues. I did a lot of research for this book, and one of the things that I find so disturbing about the times we live in is the willingness to engage in false claims. I wonder, sometimes people say, are we living in a post-truth world? I think we're living in a post-shame world, when people are willing to go along with the con. And I think that's the biggest problem we have today, is we're so polarized that we are willing to accept falsehoods if it advances our own interest, or our own side, or our own party. And that's what I want to talk about today. When I served as a prosecutor, I do believe there is such a thing as truth. Now, certainly there are things that are unknowable truths about our God, about our religion, about philosophy. But there are simply true facts, right? We are all in this room together right now. That is a fact. As a prosecutor, I couldn't just make stuff up. I had to use facts supported by evidence, a witness who was testifying, or a document, or an object, or a video that I could show people and say, this is the evidence, and from that I conclude that this fact happened. Barb mentioned some of the cases that I oversaw as U.S. Attorney, and one of the most significant cases was the prosecution of former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. And that was a case about what happens when people traffic in lies. It was a corruption case where the Kilpatrick administration cheated the city of Detroit out of $84 million, mostly through awarding of contracts for water and sewer projects, which are worth tens of millions of dollars. But the gist of the scheme is if you wanted to do business with the city of Detroit, the contractor had to agree to kick back a large sum of money to members of the administration. So that case was really all about lies, and the jury got it. There were people in that jury who were selected who had voted for Mayor Kilpatrick twice. They supported him, they liked him, they thought he was a great leader and a charismatic person. But truth mattered in that courtroom. I remember a juror who said, I voted for the former mayor twice, but what I heard here in court made my stomach turn, and so I returned a verdict of guilty. I worry what will happen in our future if we continue down this path of accepting lies when it supports our vision or our worldview or what we want the truth to be. Well, let me start by defining some terms. One is this concept of disinformation. Sometimes people ask me, like, isn't that just a fancy word for lies? Why are you using this word disinformation? I haven't heard that word before, that's new. The word disinformation has now become popular in the popular lexicon, but it derives from a term in the intelligence community. I spent most of my career as a national security prosecutor. And so I learned about all kinds of threats through terrorism and other kinds of threats, but one in particular is information warfare. And disinformation is part of information warfare. It is maybe a lie, it could even be a truth, but it is used to elicit an emotional response, to cause us to react to something out of feelings as opposed to logic, to take the bait. And so you'll see things that ramp us up or stoke our fear or make us angry. That's disinformation. A falsehood deliberately spread to elicit a reaction to promote an agenda. And then there's misinformation. I'll come over and talk to you, Pat and Jerry. There's misinformation. Sometimes, I have 4 children, sometimes they refer to me as misinformation. Thanks a lot. Misinformation is kind of its unwitting cousin when we hear something that is false, but we believe it to be true, and so we share it with others. And it is something that disinformers count on, the willingness of people to amplify that false claim because it makes sense to us, it fits our worldview, right? Donald Trump couldn't have lost because everybody I know voted for him. It must have been a lie, it must have been stolen. And so people believe that and repeat it. Russians refer to this phenomenon as useful idiots, people who are willing to go along with the con and spread that false information. I'm going to move this back in case I trip on it, fall off the stage dramatic fashion. I will tell you an example of misinformation and a time that I myself fell for misinformation. We're here in church in my faith community. We call this confession. I saw something online that said Patrick Mahomes, the great NFL quarterback, MVP, Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes, had issued a statement saying that he was not going to play another down for the Kansas City Chiefs until they changed their name to something that was not offensive to Native Americans. And I thought, wow, way to go, Patrick Mahomes, putting your money where your mouth is. This guy makes millions of dollars a game, and he's going to use his platform to speak out about something he cares about, an injustice he sees in our world, and he's willing to put his neck out on the line for that. Good for you. So I had to retweet that, right, because I had to jump on that and share that information with the world. Well, later that day, I was with my husband and my son, and I said to them, did you guys read that story about Patrick Mahomes? Isn't that unbelievable? And my husband, who is very much a news junkie, said, no, what story? I don't know what you're talking about. Like, come on, you must have seen it. It must be all over the news. Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs, not going to play another down. And he said, no, I haven't heard anything about it. In fact, it sounds kind of fake. And I thought, now that I say it out loud, it does sound kind of fake. But it can't be fake because I read it on Twitter. I'm sure it's real. So I went back and I'm scrolling through my phone and I find it. There it is. There's the original tweet. It's from ESPN, legitimate outlet. It's from their SportsCenter flagship station. But then I put on my reading glasses, as we must for eyes over 50, and I saw that it was not from SportsCenter, but it actually said Sprats Center. It's a fake. It was a fake. But I had bit and I had spread it. And why did I bite? Because I wanted it to be true. And so rather than check a second source, read a little more deeply, read a little more closely, I spread that information. I was a useful idiot. And why did I do that? Because I reacted with emotion instead of logic. It hit me where I live. And one of the things that happens on social media is that because our private information is scraped and collected and built into profiles, there are algorithms that know I'm a good target for this message, that I'm likely to be one who's going to take the bait, that my behavior can be nudged with this tweet. And so that's how misinformation works. And so we find ourselves, I think, in a time when disinformation is worse than it has ever been before. You know, certainly we've seen political spin, right? Bill Clinton did not inhale swift boats for Kerry. I mean, we've seen all this kinds of political spin and dirty tricks, they used to call them, before. But I think that this problem is more acute than ever before right now for two reasons. One is technology, right? Social media and now artificial intelligence, 24/7 cable, all of this technology gives anybody the ability to be a communicator and a publisher. We can send a message to reach millions of people instantly, and we can do it anonymously. So that's a real big problem, I think, that's making this problem so acute today. But I think the other one is our willingness to accept it. And that's because we have become so polarized in this country. There are a number of reasons for the polarization. Some of it is an attack from Russia, who works to sow discord in our society. One of the things I now teach a course in national security at Michigan Law School. One of the things I assign to my students is Robert Mueller's report from his 2016 investigation into Russian interference into the election. And you know, there's so many people, there's even so much disinformation about that. And I don't share it with them for what it did or didn't say about Donald Trump and his campaign. That investigation was all about Russia. And what he found was that Russia's goal was to spread disinformation, to use information warfare for three goals. One was to influence the outcome of the election, to assist its favored candidate, Donald Trump, and to harm its opponent, Hillary Clinton. And the reason was, not that they're Republicans or Democrats, but that they believe that Donald Trump's America First agenda would clear the world stage for them to accomplish their objectives of destabilizing NATO and taking over Ukraine and other kinds of things. So number one goal, influence the outcome of the election in favor of their preferred candidate. Number two, to sow discord in society, to get us angry with each other. They posed as ordinary Americans, whether it was Christians or coal miners or black activists or Muslims, they posed as Americans and then said outrageous things so that we would see it and react with anger and say, look at how awful those people are. Can you believe the things they say? They're the ones who are racist. They're the ones who are sexist. They're the ones who are elitist. But in fact, it was just Russians posing as Americans to stoke division in society. And their third objective was to undermine public confidence in the outcome of democratic elections, to destabilize democracies around the world, to cause people to question whether there's any such thing as a free and fair election that's not rigged. And frankly, by all measures, they succeeded in all three objectives. And that's where we find ourselves today with all of this division. But it's not just Russia alone. And frankly, that's what sparked my interest in writing this book and why it's called Attack from Within. I now see Americans, leaders and others, trafficking in the same kinds of disinformation. And whether it's their objective or simply a collateral consequence of their political agenda, it's having the same result. Trying to influence their preferred candidate, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, is sowing discord in society and is undermining faith in our free and fair elections. And so I think that is part of the problem. There's a great book by Ezra Klein that I cite in my book called Why We're So Polarized. And one of the biggest factors that he attributes to this problem is the better access to data that political operatives now have. Because they have such good data, because they're able to scrape our personal information from social media, they have really good data about voter preferences. They can tell, there's this group called Cambridge Analytica. It was Steve Bannon-funded group in 2016 that really pioneered this technique. But they said that if they could get 17 data points about someone, they could predict with 94% certainty which way you might vote. And they also knew how to nudge you by targeting you. If you care about union issues, they're going to flood you with union issues. If you care about cutting taxes, they're going to target you. It's all about taxes. I am reading and hearing now from my friends in Metro Detroit that if you are an Arab American, you're getting one set of ads about how Kamala Harris is terrible and she has allowed all of this death and destruction in Gaza. If you are a Jewish American, you are hearing about how Kamala Harris refused to put Josh Shapiro on her ticket and she is no friend of Israel. And so they know who we are, they know what issues we care about, and we're being targeted with that. There was also, according to Ezra Klein, a strategy pioneered in the 2000 election by Karl Rove, who was this really brilliant political operative who pioneered a strategy that is now used by both parties, and that is the idea they now refer to as doubling down on your base. So it used to be a time, we can probably all remember, when during primary season, the candidates would try to cultivate support from the more extreme parts of their base, right? The Republicans tried to talk about the conservative issues that might appeal to the most conservative voters, because those are the ones who vote most reliably in a primary. And for Democrats, they would focus on liberal issues that might attract the more liberal portion of their base to get them excited and out to distinguish themselves from a field of other Democratic candidates. But what they had in common is for the general election, they would come together and try to appeal to the swing voters, right? The moderates, the independents, people who don't have a strong foot in either camp, but just want to vote for the best candidate, common sense. Well, what Karl Rove determined was that's a sucker bet. What really matters is getting massive turnout from your base. So what I want to do is I want to stoke fear and conspiracy theories. This election is an existential crisis for our country. If the other side wins, this could be the last election we'll ever have. They're in bed with Russia, or they're communists, or they're Marxists, or they're fascists, or whatever it is. Because if we're so scared about the other side, we will show up in huge numbers, and that's what they want. High turnout from our base, the far right and the far left. And so what's left of people who are kind of moderate in the middle of the road? You know, I tend to vote one way or the other, or I'm a swing voter, or whatever it is. Those people are what are referred to as double haters. I can't stand either one of them. I might just stay home. I might vote for a third party candidate. And you know what they say? Yeah, go ahead, that's great. I am quite happy if you check out of politics, because when you vote, you might vote for the other guy. I'd rather you stay home. What I really want is for my base to turn out. So I'm going to amp them up with fear and conspiracies and all kinds of things, because if I can get them to turn out, I'll win. So that might be a great way of campaigning, but it's a terrible way to govern. It's why we have so much gridlock in Congress. It's why we can't get anything done, because legislation requires compromise and nuance. I mean, what's going on at our border is terrible. We've got just chaos and a broken immigration system. We should have a merciful immigration system that protects the safety of this country from people who are intruding. And how do we do that? Through compromise. There was a bill proposed by a Republican in an effort to reach that compromise this summer that the Republican candidate said, kill it. I'd rather campaign on it than solve it. And that's terrible for democracy, and it's where we seem to be headed these days. And so, if you read about the history of disinformation and some of the tactics that have been used before, declinism, that's something that Hitler used to come to power, scapegoating and demonizing other as bad people in society, undermining the public institutions that can protect us from abuse and lies, like the courts and law enforcement and the press and the civil service, even scientists, the CDC or the EPA, people who will protect us from harms. We're even hearing lies now about hurricane relief, that if you filed a claim for relief, FEMA would come and bulldoze your home, that the funds were limited to $750 because all the money had been given away to illegal aliens. False. There were people who were FEMA relief workers who were even attacked by gunmen and said, get out of here, we know that you're here to seize our land, because of all of these false claims in service of promoting this us versus them agenda. And we hear it today, don't we? We hear candidates tell us that our country is in ruins and everything's horrible and everything's going downhill, that we're seeing American carnage or cities in ruins. I mean, certainly we have work to do, but frankly, America has never been better off than before, right? Instead of a shining city on a hill, or why is it all these immigrants want to come here? Because it's great. We live in the best country in the world. We had a candidate the other day refer to it as the garbage can of the world. Talking about America in those terms, I mean, we have our problems. We should look at our country critically. We should try to solve our problems so that we can be better, ever moving toward a more perfect union. But to hear people tell it, you would think that we're no offense to third world countries, but that we're a third world country, and it's just not true. And crime rates are down. I worked in law enforcement. I'm thrilled with what's happening with crime rates, and that's a sign of prosperity. Crime rates go up when people are poor and desperate. Crime rates are down because the economy is up. Why do we have inflation? We got economists in this room, right? Because wages are going up, because the GDP is going up. We need to adjust interest rates to try to get that to a level where inflation is, prices are not outpacing wages. The biggest problem we see, I think, is the policies that have led to income disparity in this country. CEO salaries off the charts, jobs shipped overseas. Those are the things that cause the working class to feel like they are not better off than their parents and are being left behind. But instead, let's blame it on somebody, right? For Hitler, it was the Jewish people. They're the source of all evil. They're your problems. And people would get fired up and cheer when they were forced to scrub the streets because they were told that this is the demon. These people are poisoning the blood of America. They're animals, they're vermin. And now we're hearing the same, right, about immigrants, that they're the ones to blame for our awful economy, or it's minorities, or it's the LGBTQ community who wants to groom your children for pedophilia. Zero evidence of that. Demonizing other people in favor of a political agenda, and that's something that we're hearing. And now, add to all of that the technology that can enable those kinds of lies to really amplify. In 2016, one of the things I share with my students is what Robert Mueller found in detail, and that was this use of social media to cause people to believe that ordinary Americans shared these things. And you know what happens? I was about to say, and guess what? It sounded like Joe Biden. And guess what? I'm being serious right now. No, I mean it. Malarkey. When you read again and again the comments of people that you believe are people just like you, it nudges your own thinking, it nudges your own behavior. One of the things they found was that in 2016, there was an account called Heart of Texas that was Russian. It's some guy in a boiler room in St. Petersburg where they were just sending out all kinds of social media posts all day long. They amped up people in Texas to the point that they're pushing an agenda of secession from the Union. Secession ended up on the Republican Party platform in the state of Texas in the 2016 election, an idea that appears to be fully born from Russian disinformation. So they can have that effect on us, especially if you already might be inclined to think a certain way. You see people will push you because, we as humans are imperfect. We have confirmation biases. We are very susceptible to conspiracy theories. We will believe things that fit our worldview. And so when we hear these things, we believe them to be true. I'll just give you an example of confirmation bias. And we all have them, right? These are the same implicit biases that we work to manage so that we don't make decisions based on stereotypes. But I have a sister who's always late. She and I went to the game last night, and guess what? She was late. Always late. We're going to a game, she come family dinner, whatever it is. She's always late. And I said, "You're late again." And one time she said to me, "You know, you always tell me when I'm late, but you never notice when I'm on time." And I said, "Have you ever been on time?" And she said, "Yes, I'm on time a lot, but you only notice when I'm late because you think of me as someone who's always late." Well, I do think of you as someone who's always late, but I did reflect a little bit, and it's true because I see the things that confirm my vision and my opinion, and I ignore the facts that are inconsistent with that. I learned as a law enforcement official how dangerous that is in an investigation. You can't choose a suspect and then look for evidence that supports that claim because you'll ignore all of the counter evidence. You have to follow the evidence where it takes you, right? It's why the husband is always blamed when the wife shows up dead in these TV shows. Now, sometimes he did do it, but we make assumptions about the conclusion and we believe all the steps along the way and we ignore the facts that don't fit our worldview. And so that is how Russia was able to use social media to nudge people apart, to stoke division in society, to push Republicans farther right and Democrats farther left. And that's where we find ourselves. So now fast forward 8 years, it's 2024, and they're still doing the social media stuff. But we've had some recent indictments out of the Department of Justice that shows they've become even more sophisticated, using artificial intelligence, something called crowd squatting, and even recruiting unwitting agents to help them spread their claim. So AI, one of the things that is included in an indictment filed in August was that a group called Doppelganger, which is a Russian group, they don't call themselves Doppelganger, but Americans have called them Doppelganger because of the way they create these sort of bad doubles. You know, a doppelganger is like my double, but the bad one. The evil twin in TV and movies. Do you remember like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie? She always had like the evil cousin or the mean sister. It's like that. But Doppelganger is this group that is diabolical in their ingenuity. So one of the things that Doppelganger was doing is it was posting celebrity deepfakes. You may have seen the one with Taylor Swift supposedly endorsing Donald Trump. Of course, in fact, she later endorsed Kamala Harris. But people who are her fans will see that and assume that, wow, you know, and there's a reason companies pay celebrities big money to endorse products, right? You see Tom Brady on ads all the time. You see Snoop Dogg is everywhere suddenly these days. For a while it was The Rock. You know, these are people who are credible, honest brokers. And so they had Beyonce and Taylor Swift and international soccer stars saying things about endorsing their favorite candidate, as well as false claims about the war in Ukraine. Zelensky is corrupt. Zelensky is just pushing this war longer so more people will die so that he can make more money. He's weak. He's ready to surrender. He wants to kill your kids, whatever it is. Pushing that out with fake images of celebrities that looks real. One of the other things Doppelganger did is to create a false headline web page that looked like, depending on who the target audience was, either the Washington Post or Fox News. So you might get a post from, you know, Patriot Girl, some person whose identity you don't know, but she's linking it to a story. Great story in today's Washington Post. And if you click on the link, it looks like you have access to the Washington Post. If you look carefully, what it doesn't say WashingtonPost.com, it says WashingtonPostX.com or WashingtonPostT.com. But people click on the link, they think it's the Washington Post. The masthead looks perfect, the headline looks great. They use real photos and real names of real writers for the Washington Post. But then the article will say things about the election or about Zelensky. Investors on Wall Street worried about war in Ukraine was one of them. Same with Fox News. You click on it, and it's not foxnews.com, it's foxnews1.com or something like that. But the kind of thing an ordinary person who might fall for Sprott Center probably wouldn't notice when they click the link, and will read it and it looks genuine. So that's another thing that is happening. We are seeing the use of artificial intelligence in the United States in political campaign ads. I'm very proud to see that the state of Michigan has passed a law that says political campaigns using artificial intelligence in ads must label them as such. Of course, Russia doesn't abide by our rules. So, but one of the things we saw in the New Hampshire primary was a series of fake robocalls sounding like Joe Biden because they were able to sample the internet of all his speeches and get his real voice and create a script where this voice said, voters, this is Joe Biden. I want you to stay home from this election. Voting in this election is just what Donald Trump wants you to do. Save your vote for the primary and don't vote in the general election. Which really doesn't make any sense, does it? Because you can vote in both. But that message was sent out to likely Democratic voter households in New Hampshire just before the New Hampshire primary, all generated with artificial intelligence, sounding exactly like Joe Biden, complete with references to malarkey and all the other Joe Bidenisms. Fake. 2 men in Texas have now been charged criminally with that act. And there are thoughts that that was perhaps a dry run for our November elections. And remember the goals: influence the outcome, sow discord, and undermine public confidence in the outcome of elections. So imagine if you get those calls on election day, and say you get a call that says, this is your polling place, and the power is out here today. So you should come back and vote tomorrow. If in a close election, in a swing state, in an important part of the state, if even only a few people fall for that, it could have an impact on the outcome of the election. So I'm concerned about what artificial intelligence might allow us to do. There's a fake ad for Kamala Harris going around, you may have seen. It's where it takes her real ad, you know, where she's talking to voters and she's at a rally and smiling and laughing. And again, because her voice is out there so prevalently in the world, they were able to take a large enough sample size to create their own script. And so she says, I'm Kamala Harris. Luckily, Joe Biden was too senile to run for president. And so I took the nomination from him, and now I'm running, and I'm the DEI candidate. So if you don't vote for me, you're either sexist or racist or both. And then, you know, she cackles with laughter. Fake, right? And I think some people will fall for it. I think other people will see it and recognize that it's fake, but it still reinforces that message, right? And divides us versus them. People will say, yeah, she did kind of get that nomination in an unusual way. And yeah, she did sort of keep quiet while Joe Biden was struggling. And yeah, she is this DEI candidate. And I hate that. So I'm going to vote against her. So it still stokes division in society. How am I doing on time, Barb? I got 6 minutes to wrap it up, to land the plane? All right, we can do that. And so what can we do about this problem? I think there are a number of things we can do from a legislative perspective. Not going to happen before the election, that's for sure. But regulating the algorithms, that's the computer program that tells the social media platform which messages to elevate and which ones to demote. We know from a Facebook whistleblower that Facebook actually uses the algorithm to amp up and elevate messages that are going to generate outrage. And they demote other messages. And why on earth would they do that? Well, it turns out, based on their research, that the more outraged we are, the longer we stay online. We have to respond to that. We have to tell all our friends, can you believe this? We have to rebut the claim. And so we stay on longer. And why do they care that we stay on longer? Because the longer we're online, the more they can charge advertisers for their ads. So for Facebook, outrage equals money. And so that's why people who spend time online are so angry and mad and amped up. And can you believe this awful stuff that these other people are saying? I think we can regulate the way they collect our private data so that we can opt in if we want to, instead of just reading all the fine print and clicking yes, a meaningful choice about how our data is used. I think they could clean up the bots that are online. You know, there's all kinds of accounts that are not real people. They are computer programs designed to look like real people with name like, you know, Eagle Warrior. Sounds like a great guy, right? He's fake. He might have 2 followers, but he's there and he's programmed to pick a fight with you on whatever the topic might be. If it's gun rights or immigration, he is going to tell you that you're either a Nazi or that you're a Marxist. And if you respond, you're simply arguing with software. And he's programmed. You ever use those chat bots for the store, and you ask a question and they just keep telling you the same thing? That's how it works with these bots online. But they also amplify false claims by liking and sharing and making things look far more popular than they really are. They could clean all that up, and I think we could regulate them to make them do that. But you know, big tech has a powerful lobby, and so far they've been successful in pushing back on any effort to regulate them. We need to take charge of that, because otherwise we are going to fall prey to the oligarchs, the billionaires who own these tech companies. But we don't have to wait for that to happen. I think there are things we can do on our own. One is we need to promote media literacy. I think we should be teaching it to our kids in schools. I think we should be teaching it to adults in faith communities or civic organizations or public libraries, so that we recognize the signs of a false claim. You know, if only I had taken in my own advice when I saw the Patrick Mahomes claim and looked for a second source. If you see something surprising, you should look for a second source. You should try to determine the credibility of the person who's speaking. Is it just somebody with a name like Flag Lover? Or is it a real person, a leader, a political public figure, a journalist who's making this statement? Or a friend, someone I really know? That's really important. When we read a news story, we need to read beyond the headline. Have you noticed today that if you're online, even in the print paper, the headline often does not really match what the story says? It's designed to be clickbait. They want you to click open that story and then read it, and you read the story and you're like, it doesn't really quite say what that headline suggested it said, did it? I saw one recently that I think is a really good example of this. This was in the New York Times, and it said, the headline was, "Beyond the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown." You may know who Caitlin Clark is. She's this very good basketball player, star of the WNBA, just won Rookie of the Year. She played college basketball at Iowa. And, you know, there's a lot of pressure being this new player in the league. So beyond the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown, I read that and thought to myself, oh no, the pressure must have really gotten to her. She must have had a temper tantrum or something, you know, at a press conference or something. I better read this article. And if you were to believe that she had had this meltdown in front of the press, you would be wrong. Because what the article actually said is that it was a reporter who went on a profanity-laced tirade about her. So the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown was not about Caitlin Clark at all. It was about a reporter. And so that is how it's so important to read beyond the headlines, because they're just trying to bait us in. But the final thing I think that we can all do is to resist these efforts in our own lives. Not take the bait of this us versus them society. And one of the best ways we can do that is by living in the real world. And in these times of work from home and online communication, it can be really difficult. It's much easier to hate when you are behind a computer screen and you've never met people who are different from you. Coming to church is a great place to meet people across differences. You can realize that Democrats and Republicans, laborers and CEOs, dentists and garbage collectors, we are all Americans, and we can all be recognizing our common humanity. That's what we can do, I think, to overcome this moment, to resist. And even when you see something that might advance your agenda, we have to resist the urge to take the bait. They are counting on us to sort ourselves into warring tribes. That's what information warfare is all about. But we, the people, have the power in a democracy to choose our own destiny, to resist those calls to lies and disinformation. What we need to do, and what I ask you to pledge, is to choose truth over tribe. Thanks very much. Look at that on the nose, baby.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Thank you, thank you. Some have to leave at 11:30, but Barbara is willing to stay to answer questions for those of you who can stay. And this is just a small token
thank you
of
so much.
our appreciation.
Thank you.
That symbolizes the light that you share.
Thank you
with
very
all of
much.
us.
I'm very pleased to have it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions?
Right. Jane and I will wander around, and please speak into the mic so that it's picked up for the recording.
Well, I agree with everything you said, but what opened the door to me, the possibility of outrageous things, is the very first time that Donald Trump was on a stage with his other opponents, people running against him. The things that he said and his demeanor and how disgraceful he was to them opened the door that those things are possible. And so in me as an elementary school teacher, all the things that we wanted our kids to be, kind and fair and respectful, and those things have been out the door for a long time. So I can see how over time this initial disrespect for others and saying of things that are outside of the norm that usually we would never say to each other has been a foundation for some of these outrageous things. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
I
I'm
can
trying to
address
say.
that. The phrase that I hear a lot about that concept that you're talking about is called permission structure. If there's a reason leaders lead and followers follow, people will follow a leader and follow their example. And so if we have a president who is saying disgraceful things, awful things, ugly things, calling our country a garbage can, and far worse about various people, people laugh. I've heard people say, I like Donald Trump because he says what everybody else is thinking. Really? I hope not. But he is willing to say outrageous things that most of us will check if we're thinking it, and I hope aren't thinking it at all, because we see our fellow human beings as people deserving of dignity and respect. But I do think we have brought coarseness to our political dialogue as a result of Donald Trump and his copycats. And I worry about what comes next. He has really disrupted the way we talk to each other in this country. And we see disruptions from time to time that really change the world, right? The automobile disrupted the horse and carriage. Uber disrupted the taxi business. Is this a momentary blip where we see the error of our ways, or is this the new normal? And I hope it's not the new normal, but I worry that it can be, because children do learn that, you can be rewarded by being the bully, by just using brute force to get what you want, by whining and complaining when things don't go your way, by never accepting no for an answer. I hope we are continuing to teach our children that that's not the way to be, but we got to show them also. And if we aren't showing them from the highest office in the land, then I worry about where this goes. We have the power as voters to choose our leaders, and I just hope we choose wisely. So let me say, while we're traveling there, I'm going to answer questions, and then afterwards I will sign some books. If anybody wants a signature in their book, Literati is out there to sell books, but I'd be very happy to sign some as well.
Yeah. So it seems to me part of the problem is that a lot of the people we look to are passive and don't call out the lies. I mean, you have these debates where Trump will lie and there's no fact checking, right?
Yeah.
So do you have any hope that our institutions, our news will come to this new reality that we just need to be a full-time fact checker and speak out? Because when nobody speaks out and you don't hear it from your leaders and your institutions, you're going to think that the lie is truth, right?
Yeah, I've actually been very disappointed in the mainstream media lately. There's certainly good reporters out doing good things and writing stories that are exposing lies, but we've seen a few things. The most recent vice presidential debate ABC said, we're not going to engage in fact-checking. In the September debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, they did do fact-checking, and Donald Trump complained because he got fact-checked more than Kamala Harris. Could it be because one was lying more than the other? I don't know. It seems like that seems right. And even during that debate where ABC kind of knuckled under the pressure, I thought, and failed to do its job. But at one point, when J.D. Vance started talking about something that was false, I can't remember if it was, eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio, or whatever it was, one of the moderators did say, there's no factual basis for that claim. He didn't, apologize or correct himself. What he said is, I was told there would be no fact-checking. He complained that he couldn't get away with his lie. And now we are seeing the LA Times and the Washington Post declining to endorse a candidate. At the Washington Post, at least, the report is they had already prepared an endorsement for Kamala Harris, but the owner, Jeff Bezos, who also owns Amazon, said we're not going to endorse any candidate this year because we want voters to choose for themselves. And some people have resigned over it. Some members of their editorial page issued a strong statement in response to it. But I think they're afraid. They're afraid that if Donald Trump wins, he will make good on his threats to go after his rivals. And Jeff Bezos, Amazon, he needs good government policies to help him. I mean, why do you think Elon Musk is so tight and working so hard to promote Donald Trump? I think because it's good for his business with his SpaceX and other kinds of things. This is what we see in Russia with Putin and oligarchs. The oligarchs lift him up, and in turn, he rewards the oligarchs. You are going to control the steel industry. You are going to control the gas industry. You are going to control the metals industry, the gas industry, whatever it is. I'm going to allocate it to my friends, and in turn, it's going to be this great cycle where you lift me up and I reward you. And so I worry that we are not doing enough of it. But I think, we need to check our facts ourselves. And there's some great sources for that. There's factcheck.com, politifact.org. There's one called Ground News, another one called Snopes, and the Washington Post awards its 4 Pinocchios for the biggest lies of politicians. So I encourage you to check facts before you rely on them. Yes?
Yes, my question, 2016 Trump win, and we all know Russia manipulated, and everybody know. And Mueller, I look at when debate, I just not happy. And when the report out, are you happy with the report? I was disappointed with the report. Why Democratic Party cannot do anything? Even now you mention all those whatever, those online, I will say garbage, okay? So why Democratic Party cannot do anything? Why let them do control? So my question.
Yeah, so the question is, why do we let the Republican Party kind of get away with all of this stuff, and does the Democratic Party not respond? I'll say 2 things to that. One is, I think they still care about facts and truth and are not willing to engage in lies. But I don't think they're completely free from responsibility, because I do think they have participated in this polarizing political strategy. This strategy that we're better off stoking our base than trying to appeal to the independents and the middle ground. Although we are seeing Kamala Harris come back to that a little bit, talking about a strong military and the rule of law as a former prosecutor. I saw Liz Cheney speak this week at the Detroit Economic Club, who is trying to cut through all of the nonsense and say, look, I am a Republican, I am conservative, I disagree with Kamala Harris on most policy views, but this is about how we want to be as a country in democracy and truth. And we cannot be a democracy if we abandon our commitment to the truth. So I think that's very important. I think the Democratic Party messaging is trying to focus on and call out the lies that we see by Donald Trump. But there are people who don't want to hear it. I think there are people who watch Fox News all day long and don't hear it. And I think the way to get around that is we need to encourage our friends to consume more than one media outlet so that they know what's really going on in the world.
Barbara, thanks for joining us today. You've done a great job of laying out the landscape that I think a lot of us believe in. But as a legal expert, you say things like regulating the algorithms that the social media companies are imposing on us. As a legal scholar, do we have the ability, do we have the system to actually regulate these things, create laws take them to court, come up with fair decisions around what's now fragmented digital information with entrepreneurial people like doppelgangers constantly trying to get around the system. Is our legal framework something that can deal with this problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is yes. I don't think we can solve all of it with regulation, which is why I think we also need media literacy and our own willingness to look for accurate information. But I think it could go a long way toward cleaning up some of the disinformation that appears online. So one of the things that we decided as a country in 1996 was that we really wanted to foster growth on the internet. And it made sense in 1996. We passed a law called the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1996. And it had a lot of provisions in it. A lot of it was helping kids stay safe online. But one of the provisions is known as Section 230. And Section 230, some people call the 26 words that created the internet. Because what they did is they gave legal immunity to internet service providers for any content that appears there. So it includes social media platforms. So if you're Facebook or X or Instagram or any of these kinds of things, if there is something that appears online that is, say, defamatory, no one can sue the platforms because of Section 230. They are completely free of legal liability. They say, what am I going to do? A lot of people use it. Go after the person who posted it. Well, you might be able to go after the person who posted it, unless it's Doppelganger or someone overseas. And so the idea in 1996, if you look at the statute, was to promote creativity and innovation and investment. And that made a lot of sense at the time. But I like to say it's kind of like raising a baby alligator in your bathtub. It's adorable when it's small, but at some point it grows into a man-eating predator. And I think that's where we are today with the internet. And so we are using 1996 laws to regulate a problem that exists in 2024. So I'm not saying we should completely eliminate immunity. I think that there are some things that perhaps we need it for. They say, hey, we just provide the lines. But on the one hand, they say, we're just like a utility. And on the other hand, they say, well, but you can't tell us what we have to promote or take down. We get to choose our own content moderation rules because we're just like a publisher. We get to make editorial discretion decisions, just like the New York Times. Well, which is it? Are you a utility or a publisher? Because they kind of dance between both. And guess what? We regulate both of those things, right? In various ways. Or at least we have legal recourse against newspapers that publish defamatory things. So I think that we could make some modest changes to Section 230 to restore legal liability for certain kinds of things. And that would put the responsibility on Facebook and X and these mega billion-dollar companies to take responsibility for the stuff that shows up there. They already do some of it. They have content moderation rules, and they have algorithms that find things, and they have humans who look at them, and people get deplatformed for putting things out there. But I think they could be far more aggressive in what they regulate if they knew that they could be legally liable for what appears online.
So, Barb, I think this might be the last question. Okay.
An important aspect of our American life is the right to free speech. And so that's something that we all enjoy. At the same time, we see things happening in our society these days. For example, Giuliani recently getting a whole lot fewer possessions in his life because of defaming election workers falsely, who incurred a lot of difficulty in their lives because of that, et cetera. It cost him dearly. Also, Jean Carroll being defamed by Trump and him being held responsible for that. At what point does the liability come from the recklessness of free speech that, for example, Trump claiming that Kamala Harris did something or another, the 30,000 children that wound up in sex slavery or whatnot, that complete fabrication. And at what point is there a threat of liability for making that claim? Can someone be sued for saying such things?
Yes. So, you know, I think in this country, all of us cherish our First Amendment right to free speech, and we should. It is what allows us to speak out against our leaders. We couldn't have a talk like this in certain countries. We would be shut down and probably jailed. But we can have this conversation in America because of our right to free speech. So it's critically important. And I think for good reason, we are very cautious about limiting free speech. But I think those who try to traffic in disinformation sometimes use the First Amendment as a cloak of protection beyond what it protects, because it's not absolute. And so you'll see the tech companies refer to any effort to regulate them as censorship. We even hear people say that fact-checking is the new censorship. And that's not right. It's a crime to commit perjury in the courtroom. You can't say, but Your Honor, I was just exercising my First Amendment right of free speech. You can't threaten somebody. You can't commit a conspiracy to commit a crime, which is simply an agreement. You can't defraud people. But I was just exercising my right to free speech when I told them I had valuable land in Florida. So there are limits on it, and one of those is defamation laws. So if you say something false about another person, and that person's reputation is harmed as a result, and they can prove how it was harmed as a result, then they can get money damages in exchange for that. So it's a civil remedy. We saw that, as you said, with Rudy Giuliani, when he made false claims about Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman cheating the election. When Giuliani made those claims, they sued him for defamation because their lives were ruined. They lost their jobs, they were threatened, they were run out of their homes, and they received millions of dollars in exchange for that. Same with E. Jean Carroll, who Donald Trump said was making up the story about what happened to her in the sexual assault that took place, and she received money damages in exchange for that because it harmed her reputation and caused her pain and suffering. One challenge arises when we are talking about public officials, people who are in the public domain, so an elected candidate, in an effort to encourage robust public discourse and not have a chilling effect and people afraid of crossing the legal line. The standard is even higher before someone can recover money damages. You have to show that the person not only defamed them, that they said something false and it harmed the person's reputation in a way that is quantifiable, so those are the prerequisites for all defamation, but they did so with what's called actual malice. That is, that they knew it was a lie or that they acted with reckless disregard as to whether it was a lie. And so it's why in politics it is often difficult for someone like Kamala Harris to say, whoa, stop, I'm filing a lawsuit, what you said is a lie. Because they allow a lot of play in the joints when it comes to the gist. Is the gist accurate? Then even if the details were not accurate, we'll stop. I suppose for some of the things that, eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio is a lie. The challenge there is it's against a whole community, not an individual. It will be difficult for them to quantify their loss, even though their reputations have been harmed. And so people say some really reckless things knowing that the likelihood of a lawsuit that's successful is generally pretty slim. And so we have a lot of freedom to say a lot of false stuff before we'll be held accountable. But it's not absolute, as we've seen, and I think the case against Rudy Giuliani and the case involving E. Jean Carroll are really powerful examples. The other powerful example, Dominion Voting Systems, which got a $775 million settlement from Fox News for trafficking in false claims about voting machines. So it's not absolute. I wish people would be a little more vigorous in filing these lawsuits, but I'll tell you, it's no walk in the park. Because if you're a plaintiff in a lawsuit, everything about your life becomes open to the public because you have to prove that your reputation was harmed. So you know what they do in a deposition? Any bad thing that's ever happened in your life, they'll say, isn't it true that what really harmed your reputation was when you got fired from this job? Or isn't it true what really harmed your reputation is when you, yelled at the ref in the kids' basketball game? All of these, not that that's ever happened. And many people are unwilling to go through that torturous process. All right, last question.
So this debate over the freedom of speech, I always think back, it's gone on since George Washington, when he talked about the freedom of speech may be taken away and dumb, silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. But my concern is the threats against journalists, to jail journalists.
Yep.
That's something they do in Russia.
Yeah.
So from a legal perspective, looking towards the future, how do we protect our journalists to share free speech, but at the same time, for those journalists, you know, we've discussed that they have a responsibility at the same time, but how do we protect our journalists and to allow that discourse to take place?
So it's a great question. Already journalists get all kinds of awful threats, harassment online. You know, I'm barely a journalist. I do a little bit of legal commentary, but I'll tell you, every time I go on MSNBC, I get the most horrible, filthy, evil rhetoric. Occasionally it rises to the level of a death threat, in which case I report it, and some have been prosecuted. But it's like just awful, vile stuff. I have a friend who's a reporter who has left Twitter just because I don't want to read all that garbage about myself every day. I mean, I know it's false and I know it's awful, but it's having a chilling effect in her discourse with the public. And now we are hearing about actual threats against journalists. I worry about the way journalists are drawing back, right? The LA Times and Washington Post not endorsing a candidate. You know, is that fear of retaliation? Or ABC News agreeing not to fact check? Is that withdrawing for fear of retaliation? And whether it's financial retaliation on their livelihoods or even jailing somebody, that's terrible. I like to think in this country, as a former prosecutor, that the checks and balances we have in our system would prevent a journalist from truly being prosecuted simply for something they wrote under their First Amendment to free speech. But I'll tell you, the world has really spun dramatically in the past 6 months with the Supreme Court's decision in the immunity case. A president can no longer be prosecuted for committing crimes in his official action. So if he sits in the White House and says to his attorney general, I want you to prosecute this reporter at the Washington Post who wrote bad things about me, go out and prosecute him and charge him with treason, whatever it is. And they say, well, good for you, President, you're going to be immune, but what about me? Oh, don't worry, I'm going to pardon you. So go prosecute him, and you're going to get a pardon, and we'll get rid of that inconvenient, pesky reporter. We'll be able to get rid of that person. I'd like to think that grand juries and judges would withstand that sort of thing, but the longer time goes on and the more this authoritarian president appoints judges to the bench who are willing to go along and appoints an attorney general who's willing to go along, what happens to the good people? They resign in disgust, and who do they replace them with? People willing to go along. And so I do worry, it might take a few generations to get there, but I do worry about what the future might look like in America if we don't, at this moment, stand up to these, this creeping toward authoritarianism.
Oh, Barbara, thank you so much. I also... I also want to share that in Barb's book, she does a wonderful job of laying it all out, but then at the end gives us hope, gives us answers and suggestions, and that was the best part for me. So thank you so much for being with us today.
You bet.